Hello, I am back. It is good to be back. I've been gone for a couple of weeks, and it's good to be back with you for Bible in a Year. I know Zach and Taylor have done a great job with it, but I missed doing that. We were in Turkey, and in the fall we're going to do a small group campaign Sunday mornings and in small group called Seven, talking about the 7 Trojan horses of the church, and you don't want to miss it. We film live on the site where those churches would have been, and it was an exciting time doing the work and the project, and I think you're going to enjoy it. But let's get into the Word. That's what we're here for, is to study the Word, and we're going to look at Joshua chapter 7. Quite frankly, I wish I could have been here earlier. There's a whole lot that was covered that I wanted to talk about, and so I was disappointed I couldn't be here, but we get to start in Joshua chapter 7, and we're going to go all the way into Judges chapter 1. And if you're listening recorded right now, try to get online when we're live at noon on Wednesdays. You may have questions. That helps us answer some of those questions, and I'm sure as we go through the scripture today, there's all kinds of questions you're going to have. Please go ahead, ask those questions, and we would love to answer. It'll just make this conversation a whole lot deeper, and I think we'll bring out a lot of revelation of where you're at. I don't like answering questions that people aren't asking. And so you can help me by asking the questions that you're curious about, and there are no dumb questions. If it's something you don't know or understand, there's probably a whole lot of other people who have the same questions, so I want to encourage you to do that. Joshua chapter 7, we leave off in Joshua chapter 6 with Israel enters into the promised land. They go over the Jordan River. They attack Jericho. God tells them Jericho is the first city. And if you understand the first fruit, firstborn, which we went through a couple of weeks ago talking about that, God says it's the first city. That city belongs to me. That city is cursed. And so what he's saying is, I want you to destroy everything in the city. Everything that exists in Jericho, I want you to completely destroy. And they go in there and they do what Joshua thinks is obedient to God. Joshua believes in the people of Israel, the elders of Israel, believe they've done exactly what God has prescribed, what he's said. And they're ready to move on to AI and to take on AI, but they don't feel that they need to do as much or send as many men as they did with Jericho. And really in Jericho, they kind of all just marched, and the whole thing came down, and then they went in and destroyed it. So they go to AI thinking this is going to be they're on a high. This is going to be an easy battle. And when they go there to fight against AI, they lose. And in fact, they're routed. It says that there were men that died in the battle of Israel. And Joshua comes in, and he's on his face, and he's crying to the Lord, and he's like, why did you do this? And God, why? I thought you were with us, and why is it that we lost this battle? And he makes this statement. He says, why, God, did this happen? In verse 6, he says, then Joshua tore his clothes, fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same, sprinkled dust on their heads, and they're mourning. I mean, they're like, oh, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan? It sounds awfully familiar to what they were saying in the wilderness. Why did you do this if you were going to just leave us here? And I think that's a question we often ask when things aren't going well in our life. We often ask, well, God, why did you ask me to do that? Or why did you ask me to tell me to marry them? Or give me permission to marry them? Or give me permission to take this job? Or why am I going through this? We always want to ask God why we're facing trials of every kind. The Bible says in life there's going to be trials and there's going to be problems, and many of them are not just things that happen to us. A lot of them happen to us because of decisions we make. And God, he says, Joshua, listen, I'm with you. I've told you I'm going to win these battles with you. So if you didn't win the battle, why is your first response to go after me? Why is our immediate response to think God failed his word? Do you ever consider that? Like when things aren't working the way we think they should, our immediate response is to look at God and say, God, why are you failing? When God never fails. He's never failed. He doesn't fail his word. He stays true to his word. If there is a failure, if there is a breakdown, it's going to come either on our part, on our behalf, to fulfill our part of the promise, the covenant we have with him. And I think a lot of times we try to blame God for bad things that are happening to us as a way, maybe subliminally or unconsciously, we blame him in an attempt to manipulate him to do what we want him to do, to try to somehow say, poor me, I feel bad. Like what you used to do to get your mom and dad's attention when you wanted their attention or you wanted them to do something for you. You try to act in a manner so they feel sorry for you, and then they would do it to get you. We almost treat God like that. And God says, Joshua, stand up. This isn't the time to start blaming me for something you did in your camp. There's sin in your camp. The city of Jericho was devoted to me, and there are devoted things in the camp. And you need to recognize that I didn't fail my word towards you, but someone in your camp has been disobedient, and there's a curse in the camp. And there are times where we face things in our life where we need to stop looking at God and blaming him for it. We need to ask the Holy Spirit, reveal to me what that thing is in my life that's preventing me from walking in your word, in the promise of your word, and what you've expected or what you said you would do. And so they do that. And during this whole thing, we know that Achan, one of the soldiers, when he was walking through the camp of Jericho, destroying everything, he saw a robe that he really liked. And he saw some silver and some gold, maybe some jewelry. And he looked around and he said, no one's looking. Who's ever going to know? And he took it and he put it into his tent and he hid it. Here's the problem. It wasn't he was looking around to see who around him would see him. But it really didn't matter if anyone around him saw him. The one it belonged to, the stuff belonged to, saw it. He was not only disobedient to what God was saying, he was robbing God. And his decision to take what was God's and bring it into his tent and hide it. Now, where are you going to wear that robe? But he took it and then hid it. No one could see it. So if no one can see it, then it'll affect no one, right? It's not going to have any effect on anyone if no one sees it. The problem is God saw it, and it affected the lives of 37, 38 people who died in the battle with Ai. His decision, your decision, we see it in this right here. When we make bad decision, it impacts lives. It makes a difference. Your personal decision impacts, if it's a decision that can bless people, and it's a decision that can bring curses on people. And Achan, how does God get Joshua? Because it's hidden. It's hidden. God takes Joshua and he says, "Listen, I will show you." And he goes from to the camps. He goes from tribe to tribe, and they just basically whittle it right down to the family, and it comes right to Achan, and the entire camp ends up taking Achan and the things he stole and everything that was Achan, and they end up burning his whole family is stoned, his camp is burned, everything is destroyed to remove the curse because of a bad decision. It's interesting, and one of the questions that people might ask is, why is God like validating the death of people? The reality is we all die. Every one of us are going to die. And we think life is a right. Life is not a right. You didn't earn your life. Life was given to you by God. And when you think life is a right, you think you have this right to exist. You don't have a right to exist. God gives life to those who are obedient to him. And to those who are not, it isn't their right to exist. And I think even in the pagan world, death was common. Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Don't get me wrong. God's not out there with a sword looking to who he can kill, or he would never have sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die on a cross to set us free from death. But if you don't understand that God gave us life, he's God. And we get the choice of who we're going to live it for. And if you choose you're going to live it for something other than God, you're living it for an enemy that comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And you're living for something that is working against what God is trying to restore on earth. And these people who came up against the Israelites, they were coming to battle against the Israelites. It wasn't like Israel was necessarily going to them in every case to kill all of them, although they would battle against Israel. They would come against Israel and fight them. So I get in the current day and age and the culture we currently live in, we struggle with this. And it's interesting because it's not, we think we're more educated, we're smarter, we just have a better grasp on things. We're so much smarter than previous generations that we no longer define a man by biology or a woman by biology. We no longer define our identity for who we are. We define it by what we do. We're so intelligent and smart that we don't use truth. There is no truth. We just don't believe there's truth anymore. That's all. So I would argue that we have become less intelligent. We've become less gifted in understanding what is reality in the culture in which we live in, and people are falling into this trap. So let's move on. Achan is destroyed. Then Israel, after doing that, they go back to Ai and they completely destroy Ai. Joshua lifts up a javelin. The javelin, as it's lifted up, he does not put it down until everything is completely overcome, destroyed. Everything is wiped out, and then they're able to move into the territory that was once controlled by Ai. And then he makes this interesting statement. After they win the battle of Jericho, they come and win the battle at Ai. Joshua makes this very clear statement. He reads the law to the people of Israel. He reads to them the law. And it really is a reminder to keep their bearings straight, lest they forget that when everything is going well and now they're victorious and they've won the battle and they've restored what needed to be restored, they understand, man, when we're obedient, we will have the victory. When we're not, we'll have trouble. And Joshua, after the victory of Ai, he says, I just want to remind you the word that Moses gave us. And it says he read the entirety of the law to them, and he went through the entirety of the law to let them know that it is God who's fighting for us and with us. I really do believe sometimes we forget that the blessings in our life, the things that we're experiencing, every good and perfect gift comes from above. The blessings and the things we experience in our life come from God. We dare not forget that the breath I breathe today, the life I have today, the opportunities I have before me have been given to me by God, and opportunities to live with life. And Joshua is coming back to the people of Israel and says, don't forget this. Then it goes on, Joshua chapter 9. And if you have any questions, just stop me, ask. I'm going to go through this. Something that's interesting, they go and they defeat Ai is a huge city. This was an impressive victory. They've seen them defeat the impenetrable walls of Jericho. They come to Ai now, and they defeat Ai. The news is traveling that these city-states, and it's interesting just to understand, at this period of time, there really wasn't the nation of Canaan. Canaanites, Jebusites, Hittites, they were all throughout this area. They had cities and countrysides that they controlled, and even they would attack each other as city-states. So if you can imagine, this wasn't a nation of people other than Egypt. You're not really seeing this a lot. You're seeing more city-states and groups of people that are in these cities, and they have kings, and these kings are fighting, and maybe they conquered 2 or 3 cities, and so they're bigger. Their kingdoms are a little larger, but they're really conquering groups of people. And they're kind of serving as city-states. So when Israel comes into Canaan, there isn't one king of Canaan. There are cities that they're conquering. There's these little micro kingdoms that are in the area, and really it's Canaan. It's considered Canaan and the Canaanites, but there are different tribes and types of people in those areas, and some were stronger than others depending on their leaders. And we see this concept even in Greece, when you had Sparta, the city-state of Sparta, and Athens, and they would fight against each other. It's very similar to that you would have seen in this period. So when Israel comes in, this whole idea of conquering all of these kingdoms was a common thing, except it wasn't common for people of this size to just come in that didn't have a presence there already to come in. They were now coming in and taking over many of these micro kingdoms, and they were essentially putting the tribes of Israel in these places. And that's what's taking place right now. So as they're doing this, as they're kind of moving across the land and defeating these city-states, and it's small, but it's still pretty massive land mass for people who have no cars. I mean, they're walking, they're marching, they're traveling by maybe donkey or horse if they have them. That's how they're kind of moving in. And they're not it's not like they have a massive weaponry system. I mean, this Israel is not a nation. They're becoming a nation in size of people, but they really don't have all of the things that would manufacture the strength of a nation. And they're coming up against these kingdoms that have been rooted in these areas. Their homes are there. They have the manufacturing, all of the things they need to battle against Israel. There is no way in the world that Israel should be moving into this territory and winning. It is absurd to think that this migratory nation or group of people would have the ability to take something that has been rooted, that have defensive things in place and an offensive things in place. They have warriors that have been trained over time to fight, and yet Israel's coming in and conquering these cities, and it is wreaking fear in the kings of this area. And it's so much heard that one of the tribes, Gibeon, after hearing what was happened, the Gibeonites are like, listen, all these kings are trying to come up against Israel and to fight them, and they're not coming out on the winning side. I don't think the Gibeonites are like, we got to try a different strategy. And their strategy was, let's go to them, let's get them to enter into a treaty with us. And they come up with a strategy where they say, listen, what we'll do is we'll bake bread, we'll put on clothing that is thread worn, we'll put shoes on that have been worn out. We will bake bread and that's take bread that's moldy, have wine bags or the flask that the leather is cracking, so that when we get there, we'll tell them We are from a faraway place. We have heard of Israel and the power of your army and the power of this nation. And we have come because we want to be in alliance with you. We want to make a treaty with you. We want to be yoked with you. And I think like can happen with a lot of people, when people come to you and they start to sing your praises and they start to tell you how great you are endeared to them. And in that endearment, sometimes you can put yourself into a position that you don't think with wisdom, that you don't consider, well, let's go to the Lord and ask what he thinks. And it says in Joshua 9 that they didn't inquire of the Lord of what they should do. I think they were more overtaken by the endearment of these people, by their praises of these people, that they were like, well, yeah, you know who we are. We don't need to come. And they kind of like them. And then they enter into unity with them. They yoke with them. And when they make this treaty with them, they find out later that Gibeon is not from a faraway land, that they're in their backyard, that they had been deceived. And of course, they're angry, but they can't actually go and kill the Gibeonites because they're in a treaty with them. Now, quite frankly, in some ways, and it's weird saying that, you got to respect the Gibeonites. They're like, we can't defeat them, so let's try to join them. And that's exactly what they did, is they got Israel to make a treaty with them because Israel didn't inquire of the Lord. They just assumed that that's what they should do. And there are times when we make assumptions that that's what we should do because it seems good, it seems like the right idea, and we end up yoking ourselves into something that gets us into greater trouble. And you'll see it in a moment. Because after this, they said essentially, okay, you deceived us. And because you deceived us, we're not going to kill you. Later, we find that they are many of them are killed by Saul and his zeal for Israel. And then David later on after that ends up going through a drought, and a whole bunch of stuff has to happen in Israel because of the curse of that. They don't kill the Gibeonites, but they put them into slave labor. They make them woodcutters and water carriers, and they said, this is what you're going to do because you deceived us. But they're living. So the Gibeonites could have either been dead or serve Israel, and that's exactly what they did. They chose to serve Israel. Now, it's interesting because in a treaty, when you make a treaty, you're yoking yourself with them. And in Joshua 10, Joshua says he yoked himself with Gibeon and put themselves in alliance with Gibeon, which means that they were kind of like the United Nation. They were united together. God never called them to be united to any of these nations. In fact, he said, you're to destroy them all. Why? Because these nations will cause you to follow other gods. Why was it that the nations needed to be put to death? Well, it was because the people of those nations would bring their religions, their gods, which were appalling before God, and it would then they would intermarry with the people of Israel. They would have relationships. They would intermarry their cultures. They would yoke together. When you yoke together with the unbeliever, when you yoke together with a culture that is ungodly, it will cause the godly culture to literally begin to shift its view to follow the pagan culture of the day. Now, these are cultures. If you think the people that were being defeated by Israel were good, I'm sorry to inform you, these were kingdoms in the land God claimed as his own. What's interesting is there's a lot of people who say this isn't Israel's land. This is whoever was the Palestinians were there, or the people before that. This was not Israel's land. You're right. It's not Israel's land. It's God's land. And he gets to choose who he wanted in that land, and he chose to put Israel in that land. And what they were doing in the land, he even tells them this. He says, if you continue the practices, the demonic practices of the people and the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Hittites that is happening in that land, I will not only I will remove you as I am going to remove them from my land. God says this land is holy. It's set apart for him. It's not a matter of just putting it's not Israel's land. It's not Palestinian land. It's not the U.S. land. It's God's land. It's set apart for him.
Pastor, we got 2 questions.
Yes, 2 questions.
One is, how long did these conquests last? And she says 50 years. How long did they last?
It lasted, and I have it somewhere here in my notes. I think it was about 6 years. 6 years to conquer the land. So in Joshua chapter 12, you're going to see all of the tribes and all of, the map of the tribal divisions. The conquest took about 6 years to conquer the land, and it was about the 13th century BC.
Interesting.
So it went pretty quick. It was not they actually conquered it fairly quickly.
Second question. And if you go to Joshua 10:13, I'll pull up it on the screen for you as well. It says, and the sun stood still, and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. And his question is about the book of Asher, because following that, it says, is this not written in the book of Jasher?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is an incredible battle. It's the only time they say where God actually listened to a man. I think there are other times where God listened to a man, but here it says that God, in verse 14, it says the day that God listened to a man. What's interesting about this battle is they got into Israel's in this battle because of Gibeon, because they yoked themselves. You got to be careful who if you're getting married, you want to yoke yourself to a believer, because you got to be careful who you're yoking yourself with, because there are battles you're yoking yourself with. And when you get married to someone, you're marrying them. Oh, it's all love, 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 love. It's great. You think it's love. It's more infatuation. But you're also marrying their baggage. You're marrying the things that come along with that. And so these 5 kings that attack Gibeon because they hear they made a treaty with Israel. They don't attack Israel. They attack Gibeon. And Gibeon calls to Israel and say, hey, come, fight with us. These 5 kings are attacking us. And they figured, that's all come together. That's not fight them individually. That's fight them all together. So they fight Gibeon, and Israel comes because they're yoked to them, because they yoked themselves to a battle that Gibeon brought upon them. So they go, Joshua, after leaving Gilgal, they go all night. They get there, and they begin to fight this battle. And it said the sun stood still. That Joshua says, as they're routing these 5 kings, and they say, we need more time. And Joshua calls for the sun, and the sun stops in the sky. It's the only time in history where this happens. In fact, there's some other scientific stuff that I've read about that's out there. You can kind of look into this. Just so you're familiar, this is by Ezekiel. Do you know where Ezekiel is? Here's where Ezekiel is. This is the area this happens in. It's the Valley of Elah. Ezekiel is the mount right where the Valley of Elah is. Do you know what the Valley of Elah is famous for? If you listen to our fall campaign last fall, the Valley of Elah is the valley where David defeated Goliath. And they routed the Gath and Goliath and all the people of Gath.
I think I actually can pull it up so they can see. I got it right here. It's Ezekiel?
Ezekiel up on the hill. Now, what's interesting here, more people died from hailstone than from the sword. That it began to rain hail and people were dying from the hailstorm. So to the question, this book, and we see this. We've seen this actually, books mentioned in the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, and now in Joshua. This tells us that there are books that were written that were recording not only the historical narrative, but recording laws, recording other things that have not actually made it. That there were books that they would refer to as books of wisdom, things that they would keep on in their shelf in their library, things that they would refer back to. That they said this is what happened, and it's recorded in and we see that, and they didn't make it through history, and quite frankly, through 6,000 years of history, to be able to have the books we have, about 4,000 years ahead, to be able to have the books that are part of the Bible, even 2,000 years of history in the New Testament, to have those still part is incredible. It is in many ways miraculous that we still have these books available to us that are telling us this narrative. But the sun standing still and the moon standing still, if you're on the sun side of that, that's one long day. That's the longest day. But if you're on the darkness side of that, can you imagine waking up and it's still 2:30? I thought what happened? The night just seemed to last forever. So yeah, it's pretty incredible. And then there were 5 kings, and this is an interesting thing. I preached a message on this actually. They put the 5 kings in the cave while they chased down the rest of the army, destroy the army, and then they come back to those 5 kings. They put their foot on their neck of the 5 kings and says, this is what the Lord will do to every authority that tries to come up against what God's plan. He is the King of Kings. And they then hung the kings from trees till evening, and then they were taken down and they were defeated.
Another question.
Yeah.
So back to the book of Jasher. So they're asking, so like the book of Enoch, would that be similar to that? What about the book of Enoch?
Well, you have there. I don't know that it was similar in the sense that what they were saying. The book of Enoch, none of those were considered to be canon, which is they're not. Canon was word when the canon was put together, or the Pentateuch was put together. This was viewed as being like God's inspired word to us. That God was speaking through the people writing this word. That's what the inspired word would be. If those books were either not available or not included, they were great books, and we have great books today that speak of God and His greatness and revelation, but it would not be considered canon. Think of the number of Christian books, Christian authors who write about it and they're on your library. They're in your library today. You wouldn't put it in the Bible, but you gain great understanding from those books.
Maybe Joyce Meyer later will be canonized.
Yeah, maybe in the new one, or Joseph Prince, or there's all kinds of great authors out there that are putting there. But you have these books that they refer back to that existed, that God was using to speak to people through. So they existed just like they do now. This is a new thing. Keep in mind the city where Israel's camped. They are in Gilgal. So if there was the capital during this campaign, if there is a capital city right now for Israel where the army is coming from and going to, remember that you have the Reubenites, I think it's the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh that are over on the western side of the Jordan River, and they're all fighting together to conquer the land. But Gilgal is really the place where maybe you can put that up on the screen, where Gilgal was in Israel, so you get an idea where Gilgal was at. So they're all going back to Gilgal when they're fighting and doing all of this. Then you go to Joshua chapter 11, and the northern armies, this is a huge place. A lot of...
Is this right? I see a lot of sheep in desert.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
A map right
I
here.
wasn't looking. I was looking more for that map. You show them the map of where Gilgal was and the map of Israel. Do you have something that shows the whole country?
I will find it. There's Shiloh. There's
Yeah, you see Gilgal just north of Jericho on the right by the Jordan River, so it's really close to the Jordan River, and they're kind of, you're more toward the central part. Israel, the nation of Israel now goes all the way down to the Red Sea. It would not have been that far at the time when they're taking over. Judah would have been that land, but there it is, right north. You can see it there, Shiloh. See some of the nations that were conquered during that time. Go to Joshua 11. This northern army was pretty huge, and they met, it says, at the waters of Merom. This is a lake that's actually 10 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, formed by the Jordan River. So it's somewhere between Dan, where the city of Dan would have been, and the Sea of Galilee would be, and in the region of Mitzpah. And, water is life. And so this territory was extremely important for them to conquer because they needed a water source, a fresh water source. And there are a number of springs in the Dan area, and so they need this area. Lachish was up there. It was not necessarily a violent tribe, although we see that they're joining together to fight against Israel at one point. We know that Dan, who was assigned to be down in the Gaza area, ends up not being able to conquer the people of Gath, which is Goliath's tribes, and some of the cities, the 5 Philistine cities. So they end up literally, the Philistines are a part of the Bible narrative because Dan does not fulfill their assignment, and Dan ends up going up to the north, which was also important because they need the fresh water source. Mount Hermon is up there. Water would melt and come down. The Jordan River was very important, but it was important to get water, and this was a source for some of that.
Interesting.
If you go verse 22, there's something I want to show you as well. In verse 22,
Joshua 11.
Of Joshua 11. Sorry, it said the Anakites, and the Anakites were, if you go all the way back to the spies, they referred to them as the giants. The giants are in the Anakites. The Anakites were the giants, and they were in the area of Gaza, Gath, Ashdod. This is where Goliath comes from, is Gath. And Gath is not far from where Joshua was fighting, and the sun stood still. So Azekah, you can actually see Gath from Azekah, where they would have been fighting. So where the sun stood still in that battle where they were chasing them, that would have been that area. It would have been a pretty, that's where a lot of the Philistines will be fighting. That's actually where we're going to camp, is in that area right there, where Hebron would have been, in this valley of Elah. It's a very fertile area. There is rain there. It's an area where you kind of, it was a very beautiful area that you wanted to be. Then it goes on, Joshua. So I'm going to go through the next ones fairly quickly because it lists in Joshua 12. It lists the kings defeated by Joshua, and it tells us about how long it took to conquer the land. Or when you look and you study it, you'll find this. Can you put up a map of the tribal divisions of Israel? That when they go in Joshua, what I want you to see is when you're going through Joshua 13, Joshua 14, Joshua 15. Joshua 16, you see a lot of things like Joseph and his daughters. In 17, you see one of his daughters, Hagla. What a name. And Joshua 17, I think even into Joshua 17. So all the way to Joshua 17. And in Joshua 19, you see this. Joshua 18 talks about something else. We'll get to that. They're all in these chapters. It's really talking to us about the allotment of land, where that land is at. So you see there Asher and Naphtali, and then across the Jordan River, the half tribe of Manasseh. And then you can see the allotment of land given to them is pretty much based on how large the tribes are. And so they're given more land. You see, like Simeon was given a portion within Judah, Benjamin's there. You can see where Joppa is. That was supposed to be Dan. You see that area there. Ashdod, Echelon, Gaza, going down, that was all Philistine land, which was land that Dan was to conquer. Couldn't really conquer it. And so, although some of the tribe of Dan does stay there, a lot of them go all the way to the north of Manasseh, Naphtali, Asher, up in that area where the springs start.
Where did Caleb get his land? Like, where would that be? That's what I think
Caleb was given, was it Shiloh that Caleb, what city was it that
he got like a bunch of towns?
He was given, a number of cities. He wasn't necessarily, Caleb was given, where I did write that down, where it was. Now finding it will be my challenge here.
I can try to look it up.
So in Joshua 14, Hebron was given to Caleb, and Hebron really becomes which would have been a Benjaminite area where Saul was from. So in Benjamin would have been Hebron, and Hebron actually becomes the kind of the capital of Israel during the time of King Saul, and it becomes a pretty important spot. Caleb's 85 years old, and he makes the statement, he's vigorous for battle. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised. I mean, if you're 85, may the spirit of Caleb overcome you. What was that?
I said he was taking his vitamins, I guess.
He's taking his vitamins, all right. Joshua lived to be an old man as well. He lived into his hundreds. But Arba was the name of Hebron, the greatest of the Anakites. So it would have been a land of the giants. So when the spies were there, they were really talking about this area. If you look about northern Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, Dan, that whole area is where a lot of the Old Testament takes place. You see, that's like where King David would have been. Jerusalem is right there. Saul was a Benjaminite. And David was from Judah. So you see a lot of biblical history taking place right in that area. In fact, even some of Judges, you'll see a lot of Judges taking place there as they deal with the Philistines as well.
So this is another question I have. So you remember when Reuben and what was the half tribe of Manasseh? They wanted like the land there with Moses, yes. And then later it was promised. Was that where's the tribe of Manasseh?
Where you see Gad, Reuben. So you see the Dead Sea, go up to Galilee. Right of that, the Jordan River connects it and goes straight up. So right of that is the half tribe of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. And so at the end of this, Joshua sends them back to go back to their land, and that's what they're promised.
Gotcha.
Right on the right side, you can see division. Lynn, who's great to have Lynn on with us, asked, did Goliath have a brother? They believe he had four brothers, and he had four brothers. That's many people had even said the statement, that's why he took five smooth stones, because not only was he going to slay Goliath, he was going to slay his four brothers. I tend to believe the reason why he picked up five stones, one, to kill Goliath, but it really represented more the five cities of the Philistines that would have been in that area, Ashdod and Gaza, and the cities that were the Philistine cities that were there. And he was essentially saying, we're going to defeat all of those Philistine cities. Anyway, it goes, great questions. Please continue to ask more. Judah gets a large allotment. We know Christ comes from Judah. Also, if you're ever in the area of Judah, you find that it's not as, like right around Jerusalem, Dan, Ephraim, Benjamin, those areas are pretty plush. As you get closer down to the Dead Sea, it starts to turn into the Negev desert. Simeon, he's actually going to that land. In fact, I think the King's Highway goes through there. It's a big crater in their beautiful piece of land. If you ever get a chance to go in the area of Simeon, which would have been at that time Simeon.
I'll try to pull up some pictures in Judah when we.
It's great. Let me take you to there's a few things. Shiloh, which is in Joshua 18, they move the tent of meeting. So they're moving now to Gilgal, to Shiloh, and 7 of the tribes had not yet taken an inheritance. And so Joshua it speaks to them and says, how long are you going to wait? It's time to start conquering your land. Don't get content with where you're at. We need to defeat all of this territory, so we need to get to work. You also see in Joshua that you almost get a preview, and then you kind of go back and relive what you previewed. There's a going back and forth. So if you're trying to read this chronologically, you're going to be confused. It's kind of like it kind of tells you what's happening, and then they go back and they kind of give you more of a description as we're going through the chapters as well. So we see that they move in Joshua 18 to Shiloh, the tent of meeting there, and the tent of meeting would have been the thing that would have determined where their capital was, because remember, God's their king. They don't have a king. They have a representative for God on earth, and Joshua is now that man working with the high priest, just as Moses worked with Aaron. They worked together, and so that's what's taking place during this period of time. Joshua 20 talks about the city of refuge and for accidental murders, and then it gives us the list of those cities that would become cities of refuge. I'm creating something that I think the church needs in people of refuge, people who are willing to be people that other people can go to and talk to. I really feel like the Church of Christ needs to provide people that are available to those who have made moral failures, made mistakes, that they can run to and have conversation with, and that person isn't going to judge them or turn them in or even cause them to have to share that secret, but give them the ability to have a conversation and talk with them and process, so they're not only hearing, because when you start to if you become a person that's done something that you want anyone to know about, you start holding that secret, the devil has access to your thoughts. And you really need someone of truth that can talk to you. And so I encourage people, be people of refuge that people can come to. And you're not going to tell them, give them advice and tell them. You just ask them questions. You let them talk. You let them process, and you confront lies. You just don't force them to do things they're not ready to do. And I think the church would bring a lot of life to people. But they created cities of refuge. So if someone accidentally killed someone, they could go to the city. There would be a trial. And this is interesting. Even though they may be determined they're innocent, they would not be able to move from that city until the high priest died. And then they would be free to do that, which is an interesting thought. Not sure why that was that way, but it's an interesting thing to consider as you're looking at it. Then you go to Joshua 21, and you see the cities that are given to the Levites. They were not given whole areas of land. What you really have to identify, these are like states. So Israel's kind of taking a land that was ruled by city-states, and they're kind of coming together and saying there's a federal government here. And then there are states. And these tribes are kind of working now as states, but cities not that are part of these states are given to the Levites, and there are 13 towns given to Aaron's descendants, 13 towns given to the Gershons, and the Merari, 12 given to them. So there are a total of 48 towns. Remember the divisions of the Levite that was determined way back in, I think, Exodus. We talked about what they did and what their responsibilities would have been. But it says in verse 48 of Joshua 21, and I think this is an important statement, it says, "Not one of the Lord's promised failed. Every one was fulfilled, and they had rest on all sides." Ultimately, they lived during the time of Joshua 6 years of conquering, and then they lived in peace for many years. There was peace on every side. People didn't dare attack the armies of Israel. They were establishing their government, their nation. The laws had already been given in Exodus. They were establishing a culture of those laws, and it was being built. And then in Joshua 22, it's where we see Joshua then tell the half tribe of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben, "Hey, you guys go on back and take your land. You've been faithful to conquer the land." And on their way out, as they're crossing the Jordan, they build, the half tribe of Manasseh, Reuben, and Gad build this massive altar that apparently looked like the altar of God. And immediately, Joshua, you ever go to, there's no cell phone, there's no telephone, there's no email. They immediately assume that these tribes have fallen away from God, because it's there. And really, even in history, we see this almost separated, like they're on the other side of the river. Like, they're not really part of us. The river kind of served as this dividing line for them, and they assumed because they weren't on our side of the river, they must be against us. And so they got ready for war, and they go down and fight their brothers from the other side of the river. And when they get there, they send these representatives out, and they say, "What were you thinking? Why'd you build this altar?" And they said, "Well, we didn't build it to sacrifice on it," which was what the altar was built for. "We built it as a monument to be a reminder to you, because we're on this side of the river, that if you ever try to tell us we're not part of you, this is a monument that says we are a part of you, that we have a relationship. We're family, that we're not going to be like Jacob and Esau, but we're a nation of Jacob. We're the 12 tribes of Jacob." And it serves as a witness. He said the altar had the name on it, a witness between us that God is Lord. And it's amazing how many times misunderstandings start wars and our battles in our own families. And it's happening here, and almost divided the nation of Israel. So it goes on. Time has passed. And in fact, it says that in Joshua 23, time has passed. He says, "Be strong, be careful in action, guard, but not defensive. Don't bow to false gods. Be careful to love your Lord God." And then he says, "Do not intermarry." Do not intermarry. And this goes back to the whole concept of who we're yoking ourselves with, back when the Gibeonites made treaty with them. He says, if you do missionary dating, if you allow these people to continue to dwell in your cities, you're going to be attracted to them. You're going to fall in a relationship, and then before you know it, you'll be serving their gods. And that's exactly what Balaam told Balak. Get them to intermarry, and they'll start serving other gods, and they will fall. It's the Achilles heel for Israel, is intermarrying, going into relationships with people who are unequally yoked. They were missionary dating. And it's a reminder to us that when you come into a relationship, whether it's in business, whether it's in a marriage relationship, you do not want to be unequally yoked. You want people who live according to the culture of the kingdom of God to be in your life, so that there are no other gods. You're living by the same code, by the same law, by the same morality, moral views. And it's a big deal. This whole thing of worshiping other gods, it's a big deal to God. And so if there's anything we should ask the Holy Spirit to judge in our heart is, am I worshiping other gods? Because if I make God the God of my life, there is protection in that when I'm serving. When I make him the God of my life, there's protection. There's a covering in doing that. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in worshiping other things and enjoying other gods and don't even know it. And in 24, God called Abraham out of, he says, Joshua's giving his farewell address. And he goes, listen, guys, do you know Abraham was a pagan worshiper?
Yeah, that's interesting.
He worshiped pagan gods. And God called Abraham out of pagan worship. He said, I am the one true God. And he said it before them. And he said, verse 12, he says, I sent the hornet. He goes on, he says, just like I brought Abraham out of that place and brought him to this land, and then you went to Egypt. And he says, but I have been the hornet that is gone before you. I have prepared the way for the life you have. I'm responsible for the blessing in your life. And you get to verse 14 through 15 of Joshua 24. He makes this famous statement. He says, choose whom you will serve. You get to choose. You know, our God isn't this God that demands you only serve him. He's like, if I'm going to be your God, you serve me alone. But he's like, if choose. Do you want to serve me, or do you want to serve these false gods? Because you'll be subject to those false gods. But if you make me your God, I will be your God. I will be your protector. I will be your provider. I will be your peace. Those gods you have to try to manipulate to be good. I'm just good. That's my intention towards you. That's what I created you for. And Joshua says, choose who you're going to serve. Listen, guys, make up your mind. Enough with the waffling, going back and forth. Enough with the manipulation. Choose who you're going to serve. And he makes this statement that maybe you saw on your grandmother's wall. As for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. I've made this decision. We're going to serve him. Come hell or high water, come difficult times in life, I'm going to serve him. And then he goes to verse 19. Right after he makes this statement, he's so inspiring, such an inspiring leader. He says, you are not able to serve God. I think Joshua served long enough. He's like, listen, I'm telling you all of this, but you guys have proven on your own you can't serve him. Like you try to do all of this stuff, but it's just, I don't know what the deal is, but you struggle to serve me. And don't you find it hard sometimes that there are things you want to do, but you don't do? Well, that's what Christ came for. Christ came to make it possible to have a different heart. He changes the desires of our heart. He wants to change the desires of our heart. And then he ends, there's this ecclesia moment where the tribe, the elders and the leaders of Israel come together. And I don't know if you see it, it's an influential people among the tribes came and they made the declaration together. And this is really one of the first times we see this ecclesia moment, which where ecclesia was a political term. We know it as church today, but ecclesia was a political term. It was a pagan term. It was a term used mainly by the Greeks as they would elect leaders in their community to come together. They would philosophize. They would discuss laws, morality, direction, strategy. All of those things would be discussed. It was called like a senate in some places. And then they would, after they made their final decision, someone would come out and preach it. That's exactly what happens in this moment. At the end, where they come together, they make a decision, and then they declare to the nation of Israel, this is our culture, this is our belief, this is our lifestyle, this is what we believe. And then at that point, Joshua died at 110 years old. And then it says, after he died, this is a misconception, I think, with some. Once Joshua died, the nation of Israel just went spinning out of control. Not true. There were elders that actually continued to lead in the culture. And it was over a course of time that Israel began to wane. And we're going to walk into that in Judges here in the moment. When you go after Phinehas, the high priest, would have died, Israel would have really started to spin out of control. The central control of Israel, there was really no strong central leader of Israel. And so the tribes would have started to develop their own cultures. And when there's no central truth or person that holds it to, like Moses and Joshua, they began to get out on these fringes and started making decisions. And the nation really kind of enters what I would call the dark ages of Israel history. And even though they attacked Jerusalem and they won and then they lost it, we're going to see really in Judges this nation begin to fall apart, and a lot of it is because of their intermarrying. Because in the end, that's been the constant downfall for Israel, all the way back to Jacob. When Jacob said, don't marry these women. Don't do that. You've sinned before God. You've married outside of the tribe of Abraham. And it's because it wasn't so much outside the tribe of Abraham. Moses had married outside the tribe of Abraham, but he had married a God-fearing woman who had a father that was a high priest of God. So when you marry someone, this is a big deal. If you're someone listening to this and you're thinking about marrying someone, you love them, but they're not a believer, and you know they're not a believer, you need to get out of that relationship, because it will not go well for you. And it was the Achilles heel of Israel. And that is exactly what happened in Judges. We see that with Samson. We see that with constant people that are living during this time. So,
good stuff. Good stuff. Any final things to discuss?
I'm looking
There's
through
so
it
much. Felt like I was watching Lord of the Rings, reading this portion of Scripture. I know how much you love Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I don't really care for it at all. You know, what's interesting, and I think this is where a lot of people get caught up, they're trying to read Joshua through the lens of their cultural perspective. And I think Christians in general live within the biblical history, and they don't look at global history. They don't understand. It's like trying to understand slavery in the Bible days through the lens of America. You can't comprehend it. Yep. And we think we have this great clarity and new revelation. The reality is, you would have to go back to that day and age and understand the way people thought back in that day, not just believers in God, but pagans in general, to fully be able to comprehend this thing. We call it genocide, that Israel went on this campaign of genocide and killing all of these people, and that God just wants to kill God does not want to kill people, but these people were killing people. These people were killing children, literally killing children, sacrificing them to pagan gods. So these tribes in no way are nice people. These are tribes of people who defy God, in many cases don't even know him, think they're more religious because they worship many gods, but are trying to appease the God by killing virgins, by killing babies and offering them up, doing godless things with no attempt to change from those activities. They were dead people walking. And we think we have this right to live on earth when you don't. And anything that's going to harm the object of God's love, he's going to destroy. And the reality is they were already dead. They're only now living in a place where they can live according to what they were living on earth. But I know even sharing that now, even saying all of that, you're struggling with that. And you have to understand the struggle really comes because we've been raised in the mentality that we've been raised in that we think is the right way of thinking.
Yeah.
And you can't comprehend it.
Yeah.
So if that's something you've been struggling with, I get it. But if you go to you listen to Jesus and he says, listen, love your enemy. Let this be the thing of your heart, to love people. And that's what we're called to do. So don't now think by going out and killing an abortion doctor or going and fighting for your rights, and we're going to go and we justify why we kill or hurt people because what they're doing is wrong. the Bible's very clear. You're not given permission to go do that. The Bible is not giving you permission to go.
Very different time then versus now under the new covenant.
Yeah, well, even when we read the law, the taking of blood was a big deal. God's not. Yeah, it's something maybe the Holy Spirit will have to reveal to fully comprehend and understand what's going on here. So,
yeah.
So thank you for joining us. We will be back next week as we go through the book of Judges. In many ways, the book of Judges is it's a tough one. If there was a rating you would put on it, it would not be PG-13. It would be a little bit more than that. In fact, many people have said when you read this part, it is gory. It's real life. Israel goes through a difficult time. It's really the Dark Ages, and yet we have some incredible stories that come out of this. Heroes like Deborah and Samson comes back. A redemption story comes back, and God gives him the ability to do what he needs to do. So join us next week at noon. Invite friends. If you're watching a recorded version of this, send questions to Alex. Maybe we'll try to answer some of those questions before we start next week. We really do want this to be a resource that blesses you as it's blessing us as we go through this. God bless you guys. Have a great day and enjoy reading through the Bible in a year.